Hi folks, welcome to Wednesday's edition of the I Write podcast stroke videocast. I've got Stuart Lockhead with me today.
Hello.
And Jimmy Hutton.
All right, chaps.
The newly self-employed Jimmy Hutton. Is that right, Jimmy?
Aye, something along those lines, mate. Aye.
So if you spot Jimmy in a taxi, wave the taxi down even if you don't want to go somewhere. He needs the money.
No, didn't he?
He'll drive you about and discuss politics with you.
I really won't. Your wife on strike again.
I'm sorry about this. What the? Sorry about that. We'll go with the presser, Prime Minister's questions, and I think there might be some news about Ruth Davidson in the ether.
Baroness.
Oh, sorry, Baroness Davidson, my fault. Or soon to be.
Oh, come on. We'll just call her Baroness and get done with it.
All right, okay. The press conference today. One of the things that Nicola Sturgeon had to do was educate our journalist friends on the devolved settlement and the fact that she's not allowed to borrow money to continue furlough. One of the questions was, what are you going to do for Scotland when the furlough stops for the UK? And she had to explain that she couldn't do anything because she couldn't borrow any money to do it unless she wanted to shut the National Health Service and use that money.
So that just means it becomes another reason to vote for independence.
Yeah, you know, I mean, the question, I suppose the question was really about Scotland aren't going to do anything. That'll be the headline. Look, Sturgeon refuses to continue furlough in Scotland.
Look, I know that Peter Bell doesn't like me saying this, but they've been at it for months now, the unionists. Everything they say, every time they put Scotland down, they're driving another few voters to independence. Let them get on with it. Well,
the other thing was the announcement in the Scottish Government business plan for this year coming. £1.6 billion going into the new Green Deal that they've created, which is about jobs and new industry, etc. And I've seen it nowhere on the mainstream media. It hasn't been mentioned.
Well, it's not SNP bad so far.
Yeah, they're not allowed to report positive stories from Scotland. It's really got to be negative or worse, isn't it?
Well, there was a story in the Herald yesterday that I think I sent you guys. There was an Scottish NHS positive, some cancer treatment that shrinks the cancers that is allowed in Scotland but has yet to be allowed in England. And that was an Scottish NHS good story.
Good Lord.
Well, I kind of got a little bit over enthusiastic when thinking about it and thinking maybe that's the Herald turned the corner.
Aye, how did they slip that past the subby?
Well, but it was a very fair and accurate piece. It was like the old days when the other Mr. Bell used to write for the Herald, who has long since passed, unfortunately.
Well, he was a good writer, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. So, you know, every now and again, as you say, Jimmy, the wrong editor's obviously on the desk.
Aye, aye.
Anything else that you caught? You didn't see it, Jimmy. You didn't see the presser today, no?
No, I was fighting my way through the Edinburgh traffic.
The NRS figures come out. The weekly figures come out. What's good and what's bad? We'll come up with the good news. There were no care home deaths for the first time.
No deaths today and no care home deaths for a week.
Yeah. This is the excess deaths total they talk about, of course. Because there haven't been any, there were only 2 deaths in the last goodness knows how many weeks in the daily death total. God, why on earth? I know it's complicated. But anyway, good news. No care home deaths in the excess deaths. We did discover, I think, that more or less the main reason why they haven't done the analysis yet, and the hyenas are desperate to have a go at the SNP bad plan by saying, why did all these excess people die? And it would appear that people were perhaps a bit scared to go to the hospital when there was when the virus was really rampant.
But that's a bit weird, because the actual excess deaths, when you take COVID out of it, have been lower this year.
They've been up, yes, they have been up and down, and certainly they've not been huge.
But over the piece, they've been lower, but it looks like they might have spiked. So all those folk hanging on by their fingertips have now let go. Seems to be the message, and they don't know why yet, effectively.
That's why the media love stories on stats, though, mate, because you can make stats say absolutely anything you want. So you give a set of statistics to a half-wit that writes for the Herald or the Scotsman, they can come up with, they can concoct a half-decent story and find and work the stats to fit it.
What else did we have? She was asked about her alternative to furlough. That more than one person asked about that. She said, "I don't have an alternative, but the UK CBI is calling for an alternative to furlough." So there. So it's not her problem.
Well, she can't do anything about it without shutting down some other part of the Scottish economy and taking the money from there.
Can't do anything about it. She did give an interesting answer to a question she wasn't asked towards the end of the briefing. She said, there's a good reason why I should continue to do this daily briefings to help explain to people why we take the measures we do, because I keep getting asked or told that the messaging is confusing. So there.
And the other big one was, are you going to go to the same 6-person level that's been announced by Westminster, which is 6 people from 6 households, but maximum of 6 people.
She did say, she said, it's not about us moving to be lined up with England. England is moving to line up with us. We've been on 8 when they were on 30.
It's not quite what she said. But
yes, it is.
She basically said this isn't a difference being created because there was already a difference before it.
All right, you're more accurate than me. I can see.
Because she's very careful about not doing direct comparisons between the stupidity south of the border and the perfection north of the border.
Absolutely.
Did I sound biased there?
You did a wee bit, but you're right. You didn't want to do a comparison, mate. You just want to gently point out the idiocy that is our Prime Minister, and frankly, I'm almost disgusted to say it, but the Scottish media talking about mixed messages coming out of Edinburgh, and they can do that with a straight face when they look at London. There's not been a straight message coming out of there. There's nothing straight in London. They're all writhing and they're all snakes intertwisted amongst each other, and the message is stuck right in the middle of that. If you can find a straight message coming out of London, I want the lottery numbers for the Mons night.
Well, I can't give you the lottery numbers, but I think the message that they're attempting to get out is it wasn't our fault. As I think we said about 6 months ago, that the whole aim of this exercise is to make sure anybody but them get blamed. And it looks like at the moment, they're blaming young folk.
Well, well, that's all. They always said, even at the start of this pandemic, that the Tories would turn around and blame the people. It was the people, it's their fault, no us.
That's no people spelled P-E-E-P-U-L for anybody in Glasgow. That sounded a wee bit as in we are, Stuart. But
we are the people.
Aye, that's the one.
I have to just throw in my excuse for being slightly sounding as though I'm exaggerating a bit is that I have been training to be a sub-editor for the headlines.
All right, okay.
Tabloid headlines I'm practicing.
You didn't want to be a sub, mate. The linesman might know that you own, DRoss.
Which brings us neatly, by the way, to Prime Minister's questions. I think we all caught a bit of it.
Yeah.
Jimmy, you have first go at this one.
Aye, well, I thought it was pretty dull, if I'm honest. Keir Starmer clearly expected Boris to be absolutely prepped to the eyeballs about breaking international law, so chose to go on testing instead.
I 100% agree with that, Jimmy. That's what I thought.
it was a bit droll on that, mainly because testing, when it comes to what Westminster are talking about, has nothing to do with Scotland. We've got our own test system up here. I know that there's overlaps with ours, but the reality is what they were talking about had very little to do with us. And then Ian Blackford got up, burbled a load of nonsense, a couple of questions, and actually done better when he sat in his fat keister, because he called Boris a liar when he was replying to it. And that was about as exciting as Ian Blackford got. All told, I think Boris kind of got away with it because he got to bluster. But again, we've seen how very ill prepared he is, because by questions 4, 5 and 6, all he could do is revert back to, but I need you to tell people that schools are safe, and I need you to tell people that the office is going to be safe. And it's no Keir Starmer's questions, it's Prime Minister's questions.
Well, the thing I noticed was his final rant after question 6 had nothing to do whatsoever with any of the questions that had been asked.
Aye, that was.
In fact, did he not talk about house building and jobs?
He did, mate. It was probably what he spit that out after question 3, when he was expecting question 3 to be about Brexit and what have you. But I to be honest, I thought Lindsay Hoyle should have stopped him at that point, because that was a campaign speech. It was certainly not an answer to any question. Yeah,
I do think Lindsay Hoyle, I mean, he did have a pop at him last week, but he needs to keep doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Because, and the other thing is, Johnson is so obviously unprepared.
Aye.
You know, I mean, the point you two have already made about expecting it to go on the international law question, and then being asked a question he didn't bother preparing for.
Aye, but being a question that he should have hundreds of answers upon, and not going back, because he did go back to babbling about 320,000 people being reached and what have you. And I'm pretty sure if that's the only number that they've got to, then Boris needs to Boris needs to set fire to test and protect, because he quoted that number about 4 weeks ago. That can't be the same number now. It can't be accurate.
Well, he got asked a question, Nicola Sturgeon got asked, I think yesterday, which was, you know, okay, you've got all this capacity, how come people can't get tests? And she went, well, because there's 2 strands, there's people going out swabbing people, and then there's the laboratory strand, and the laboratory strand is under a bit of pressure at the moment.
Plus, they've got to be.
And he had that answer because she'd already given it.
Yeah, here's a point I think we just missed, because there was an overflow, you could say, from PMQs into the presser. The question of testing in England was covered. Hancock was all over the TV early in the morning talking about it. And they do seem to be overloaded, and it's possibly because the kids have gone back to school in England, same as it happened in Scotland. Was it?
Yeah.
But there is a worry, because the majority of the testing done in Scotland, not the regular stuff at the care homes or the NHS, they have their own labs, but what they call the Lighthouse Lab based in Glasgow, which is actually run as a part of the UK system. The question was asked at first, well, he was asked by somebody at the presser, what happens if there's an overflow of testing demand from England? What happens to the Scottish capacity if it all gets used up by people needing it, you know, from England? And she didn't know how to answer that question.
No, I'm sorry, Stuart. She answered it the same way she answered it 2 or 3 days ago. When the same question was asked, she said, we are in negotiation with the British government to make sure that we don't lose capacity because England gets a spike in testing. That was exactly, it was asked last week, and she answered it exactly the same way she answered it today, by saying, we're trying to make sure this doesn't happen.
Are we certain that the government or NHS or Public Health England or whoever that they're negotiating with is going to show good faith?
Well, there
Are
isn't.
we in any stronger a position than Michel Barnier was yesterday afternoon?
Well, there you go. But there is no border as far as this testing is concerned. People in London are offered tests in Inverness, you know. As far as this UK system's concerned, it's one country.
Well, and
I know half of them have got second hooses up that way.
oh, that was a low blow, Jimmy.
That was a wee bit blood in the soil. I thought that even was coming out, mate.
But no, I mean, that's the other thing that I'm beginning to take note of, is how consistent she is in her press conference answers.
She remembers what she said, which is more than that can be said for me. You know?
Or maybe it's simpler than that, Stuart. Maybe she simply tells the truth. And then you don't have to remember what you said. You just keep telling the truth.
A politician that tells the truth in the 21st century? Surely not.
I know it's a stretch, but there you go. Ian Blackford's question was all about what we've been banging on about for months, power grabs, and the way the Westminster government is not so much totally ignoring the devolved administrations with this new legislation, but in fact totally undermining them. I see that the Labour Party, who are in charge in Wales, are up in arms about it as well. Yeah,
in Wales they've said approximately the same as we're saying here to this internal market bill, but Scottish Labour are saying the absolute opposite. They're saying that this is actually not a power grab and it is devolutionary in its entirety, which is abject nonsense. I mean, for Scottish Labour to parrot that Tory line is ridiculous, because the Tory line is basically, no, you guys in Scotland aren't smart enough to understand what we're actually doing here. If you will just bear with us, you'll see that this will be good for you in the long run.
Sorry, Jimmy, did you just say Scottish Labour?
Yes, sorry, Labour in Scotland.
They've only got one MP. So you might just mention his name, Ian Murray.
I thought Scottish Labour had supported the SNP in being against it at Holyrood.
Well, they're half against it at Holyrood, mate, but they're not really against it, because if they're really against it, then they'd have to support the SNP and admit that Scotland requires more powers.
Well, look, this issue gained momentum. Well, heat. It got heat the other day about the admission of breaking international law. Then we got more heat this morning when they published, what is it, section 46 of the internal market bill. That was published this morning, so there was detail there. And also we've discovered that there is heat in this whole issue in Northern Ireland as well. The question over there is, why is Arlene Foster not been waving her Union Jacks and shouting no surrender? Did she do a secret deal with Boris? Why is Boris risking everything on breaking the law? It's a mess.
I think they've just decided that they're going to do what they want regardless.
I think you're right. Did you see any of the interviews yesterday with Bernard Jenkin? I think he'd done a couple, one Channel 4 News. But basically he said that this was Boris's plan all along, and that's how he got it past the ERG, and how he got the ERG to back him back then.
So he was always going to...
Boris had given them a nod and a wink that this withdrawal agreement was not going to be the be-all and end-all when it came to the negotiation.
Is this the border in the Irish Sea you're talking about, Jimmy?
Aye. And now that Mark Francois has done a wee disappearing act and been replaced by Bernard as head of the ERG, he certainly gave the indication that this was Boris's plan, this was Dominic's plan all along, and regardless of what they signed up to get their oven-ready deal and then present their oven-ready deal to the electorate, they were always going to change it. So
well, I can
the
believe
entirety of it is basically that this was a con job, not only on the EU, but on the entire electorate of the United Kingdom, because they presented you with this oven-ready deal, and the minute people in England voted for it and gave them their 80-seat majority, it's about as oven-ready as the engine of my taxi, for example, and you wouldn't put that in an oven.
I mean, I think you might be right on this, Jimmy. I think they've just decided they've got an end game. They've got a point at which they want to reach. They've got an amount of power they want in their pocket, and they're just going to ignore convention, the law, everything to get it.
Aye.
They want to be a dictatorship.
Wasn't there a Newsnight, I think, mentioned a blog about 3 years ago, I think, part of Dominic Cummings' blog, where he effectively said something similar to this, you know, just tear up the rules, do what you want, because what can the rest of the planet do at that point?
Disruptor.
Mm-hmm. And it does, it gets them, I mean, people will still do deals with the United Kingdom because it's the 5th or 6th or 7th, whatever largest economy in the world. People will still do trade deals and what have you. You ain't going to get any honesty, and you're certainly not going to get the kind of deal, the kind of access to the European markets that we've enjoyed for most of my lifetime. People are going to have to accept now things like Nissan is just going to shut. The car industry in the UK will just disappear because Nissan will shut. And at that point, the deal, I think there was a deal, wasn't there, with Renault to produce it, or one of the French manufacturers to produce a couple of models in the UK. None of that will happen.
I think they've already changed their mind about that.
You're talking, what, 20,000 car jobs? Usually if there's 20,000 jobs in the car industry, you're looking at about another 80,000 ancillary jobs disappearing, people making all the parts that they put into these things. So, but none of that matters to London, because none of those car plants are in London.
Do they really believe that the EU is so desperate for a deal that they'll let them away with this? I can't see how the EU can stand for it. I really can't. I mean, well, I don't understand why they just don't walk into the next meeting and go, okay, guys, we can't trust the word you say, cheerio.
Well, don't forget the consequence why Northern Ireland matters, because if there's no deal, they have to put, the EU will insist on a hard border. They cannot have a backdoor into the single market.
If there's no deal, if they just take them to court. That's what they do. And the Westminster government loses any chance of getting a trade deal with America.
Well, I think that's factored into their calculations, mate. I think they're looking at the polling and realising they ain't going to get this Republican trade deal that they expected, because even if by some miracle Trump wins, they are not going to have the votes in the Senate and what have you to push through a trade deal very, very quickly. It's just not going to happen. So
who are Britain going to deal with? If America refuses a trade deal, if the Europeans refuse a trade deal, that leaves China, Russia, India.
Apparently, they've come out with some nonsense this morning about, is it the Pacific Trade Partnership?
I heard that mentioned.
Chris has been speaking to the 11 governments that form that up. So we're going to absolutely shit and brain nest here. We're going to clear the pitch with the biggest single market on the planet that's on our doorstep.
So
and instead we're
Pacific
going to get
Rim are Australia, New Zealand,
Japan.
So that's the farmers had it. Japan, car manufacturers had it.
South Korea, Canada. Is Mexico in it?
Well, what are we going to sell them?
Cheese, probably.
What are we going to sell them? What have we got that they want?
I've no idea, mate, but it does defy, well, let's be honest, it doesn't defy belief with this Tory government, but the fact that you've got somebody with the economic backbone of Liz Truss, who's telling you, aye, but we can sort of deal with the likes of Korea and that'll be much better for us than dealing with France and Italy and Belgium and Holland. You know, Holland only take about 80% of our fish.
Well, I mean, we'll have lots of fish.
No, and of course, the new UK, independent UK, will be able to threaten the Dutch with the merchant navy, the British merchant navy. That you won't. No, we'll insist on all goods coming to the UK come on UK ships, except we haven't got any. They're all Dutch and Norwegian.
Yeah, but we've got
Danish.
2 aircraft carriers.
Aye, and that the biggest, is it the biggest port on the planet almost, Rotterdam? The Dutch will be quaking in their boots when we threaten to blockade it with a couple of a couple of fast attack boats or whatever it is that we've got left running out of Southampton.
I'd love to see how they gamed this one.
Do you think they're gambling on Europe not, even if there is no deal, do you think they're gambling that Europe won't bother with protectionism, that Europe will just let it slide and say, you know what, let's sit down and work out a tariff schedule or what have you? I didn't think so. I mean, you've got a French election coming up, mate. This is an excuse. If Britain messes Europe about, how does Macron win an election hugely? He absolutely slams the UK. He slams Boris Johnson with massive trade tariffs. And at that point, that bangs him 20 points up in the French opinion polls. But
the politics of it are straightforward, really straightforward. Europe are not going to give the UK anything for leaving Europe. Why would they? It just encourages those groups in Europe who are clamouring to get out. No, I'm sorry. The politics are make Britain suffer.
Aye. And it wouldn't just be Macron either, mate. At the end of the day, somebody's got to, well, Merkel's standing down next year, isn't she? Somebody's got to win that job as well. And again, if you're a German politician, one surefire way to appeal to the German public is to absolutely kick Britain when it's down. Because the Germans have stood by us. The Germans are the ones that have tried so hard to make a deal happen when this Conservative Party have gone out of their way to make sure it doesn't. And I'd imagine at some point that there's going to be a heck of a lot of bitterness with German politicians and, by the way, the likes of the Dutch that took our backs in Brussels and said, listen, sit down and make some kind of deal with them. Because I'm pretty sure they done that in good faith and didn't expect to be shafted like this.
Well, it seems to be the legacy of Boris Johnson is going to be a great big dildo that they ram up the international community's ass every time they make a deal.
Yeah, but the problem is the international community have got a bigger one. And frankly, see, I remember when Boris got elected, mate, and there were a couple in Europe that just, you know, they just shook their heads and they couldn't believe it because these poor buggers had to deal with him. Admittedly, only for a short time, right enough, but when he was Foreign Secretary. And I know that I thought, Jesus, but Boris was virtually a shoo-in for the job, eh?
Aye.
The bottom line is, I think a fair few people in Europe knew this was going to end badly, but they kind of crossed their fingers and hoped, nah, he can't possibly be that big an ass that he's willing to shaft his country so badly, because I know they believe that Great Britain can rule the waves and all this nonsense again, like it did between the wars, say, when the empire was still relatively strong. But the reality is, Britain's a diddy wee country on the western edge of Europe. We're Baltic, mate. See, one bad winter, when the ferry ports aren't running, we'll be with begging bowls. The French will be flying bloody baguettes over with drones and dropping them to the southeast because there'll be nothing for anybody to eat.
Self-sufficiency looks more appealing. Moving on from Brexit, Ruth Davidson.
Which is something we'd all like to do.
One day.
Ruth Davidson, the Baroness, has got herself another job. Stuart, will you be listening to
LBC?
Baroness DJ?
No, Baroness DJ. Baroness Ruth Davidson, I mean, are you surprised? No. Which she's, it gives her a platform, does it not? To do what she's quite good at. She's good on media. She's good on telly. She'll be going into I'm a Celebrity in the Castle in Wales next, which is another side thought.
Floorboards aren't strong enough.
I think the most interesting thing about her new job with LBC is who her first guest is.
Carry on.
Tony Blair.
Yeah.
With whom it turns out she had a secret meeting back in 2019, the subject of which was apparently saving the union.
Just before the election.
Are we surprised that she met with smiling Tony Blair?
Look, I'm not. I'm going to say that I'm going to promote her to leading. To, if there is an NDRF next year, I'm promoting her to lead the unionists.
Yeah, I can't see anybody better.
Can't see anybody at all. But I would imagine that given that somebody again, oh, it was Alistair Carmichael, wasn't it, stood up and talked about a wildcat illegal referendum. That's awfully handy timing, wasn't it?
Alistair the liar, Carmichael.
Aye, that's the one. That's the one. The porcupine. I mean, his lies pale into insignificance when you look at Boris, but there we go. But I think she might just be the pick for Viceroy. I thought against that when she got ennobled. I thought, you know, they're going to put her down there and we've got this new wonderful, but the bottom line, Douglas Ross, unless he's been hiding his light under about 3 container loads of bushels, never mind a bushel, then he doesn't have the talent or the ability to lead. He couldn't lead an orange walk if he was the only one in a sash. He is an absolute clown. So they're going to have to replace him when it comes to an NDRF. If he gets elected to the Scottish Parliament, he'll just be a voice. Well, you've got a very small voice because the Tories will have a reduced rump in Holyrood.
We've seen the outline of this internal market bill, and apparently it allows the UK government to full powers in all directions. And what you can see what they're planning to do. We could be right now about this Queen Elizabeth House. They are going to mirror what Holyrood was doing. They are going to feed money direct to local councils. They're going to feed money direct to Scottish businesses. This is all allowed in the outline bill that was published this morning.
In effect, they're going to be able to undermine the policies of Holyrood.
Yes.
Aye, and they're going to use her with her insider knowledge of Holyrood to do every little bit of that. And she'll also do the PR. Because she'll be busily telling you, look at all the money that's coming, the union dividend that's boosting Scottish jobs as the unemployment number goes through the roof next year.
I think that is actually a huge mistake on their part. If they start to put money into projects that either sideline or undermine Holyrood projects, the business of Holyrood as far as the economy goes, I really don't think the union has any chance of surviving. No, I think it's a really stupid move.
The North of England are already raging. The North of England believes the hype. They believe all the nonsense that Scotland gets all this extra money spent on it, and that Manchester, Leeds, Newcastle, they all lose out because they have to spend that money in Scotland.
Well, the pitfall is
labels on everything saying with love from London. The first thing that somebody in Newcastle is going to go is, where's my fucking love?
Well, that's the pitfall. By bypassing Holyrood, they need to get rid of the Barnett formula. They need to stop giving the Scottish government money, or every project they put into Scotland will be seen as extra money for Scotland.
Well, that is a danger, but I think you could be right, because I watched Scottish Questions this morning. I don't know if either you did. Did you?
No.
No, it's a painful thing to watch. And I would say that was the theme. Alister Jack was standing up. First of all, they had 5 Tories in a row, English Tories in a row, were allowed questions, and they were all reading it out. It was nothing to do with them or their constituency. It was all prepared. It was a rehearsed drama we saw. And it was all about feeding the money. You could tell it's all about, oh yes, it's £2,000 per person extra money goes to Scotland, £15 billion a year that Scotland is subsidised by, which has got nothing to do, not even if you accept the GERS figures, is not true. So yeah, no, I'm seeing a plan now. Yes, it's more and more. They're going down the wrong road. I think they'll just force people into independence.
Guys, after we've done all this, if you've got any more appetite for politics, I posted a video this morning that somebody had on my Facebook page. Go have a look at it. It's half an hour, so it's a bit out of your time. Get yourself a cup of tea and a fag or whatever. A programme called Mavis Meets from 1977, and I didn't remember Mavis, but I remember the person that she met, Margot MacDonald. And she does a wee interview with Margot in the house. Then there's a studio piece with her and Margot, and then two Yuns get invited in to have a pop at Margot. It's 43 years ago, and it's amazing. I was the stuff that's familiar, the arguments. It's the same old arguments that they were coming out with 4.5 decades ago, 6, 7, 8 decades ago. Nothing much has changed.
Well,
really, nothing much has changed. It's worth a look just for the 70s clays. But yeah, by the way, it also reminded you what a hell of a woman Margot MacDonald was.
But unfortunately, that means that the story works then, because it.
Aye, well, they've been screwed. As far as I'm concerned, they've been screwing us out of the North Sea dividend for 5 decades. Because 77 was the year that it first started coming ashore, wasn't it? I remember Betty opening Silumvo.
Well, I mean, that money was used to pay for the Thatcherite experiment. That failed. I mean, all it did was shut down industry in Scotland. But
take a look at all the wonderful infrastructure projects that have been built in and around the southeast of England on Scottish oil money.
Yeah.
And seriously, there's not that much different then for what they're saying now. We're still too stupid to run our own affairs. And
we are too stupid because we voted to stay.
Well, can't really argue with that. Stuart, have you got anything you particularly want to bring up?
Just a return in a way to the Irish angle. The newsletter, which is the Belfast newsletter, is the loyalist newspaper in Northern Ireland. And it goes on and on about Arlene Foster and a guy called Sam McBride, and he's trying to make sense of what the position there is about the border and the Irish Sea, and why Arlene Foster apparently has not. She's basically backed down on the position. Basically, they had no. The loyalists in Northern Ireland were saying no surrender to a border on the Irish Sea. And up until we discovered about this possibly breaking the law and pulling out of this withdrawal agreement, in particular the Northern Irish Sea border, it was looking like a climb down on Arlene Foster's part. And her only excuse was that, oh, well, there'll be lots of money coming here.
Yeah, but that's why she got suckered into the agreement in the first place, isn't it?
But the other explanation is possibly that she was told on the QT, so it goes with what Jimmy was saying, Bernard Jenkin was saying, that they never intended to keep their word all along. So they always said to Arlene Foster, because she's had to suffer a lot. I mean, there've been closed door meetings by very angry unionists across Belfast since the withdrawal agreement was signed, and people there is a part of the protocol. The Northern Ireland Protocol includes a bit that says basically if there's violence or disruption, they can cancel this protocol. So there was a lot of talk about the DUP and all the other loyalist parties about causing trouble.
It wouldn't take much, would it? I mean, they've not got the.
So why did Arlene Foster keep stum unless she was told on the QT that they were always going to do what Bernard Jenkins said they were always going to do?
I think they were. I think it'll be interesting to see what comes out over time. We're getting closer and closer to the end game with Brexit. But when I mentioned Nissan earlier, they must have something. You know, I mean, they must have something in writing for them to
Did May not promise them something?
Aye, but they must have something absolutely from the British government in writing, because not only did they talk about closing the plant, they actually started talking about investing. So I'm thinking that there's going to be a bung for the UK government to Nissan at some point.
Well,
they've got evidence of.
If there's a bung to Nissan, that could be the reason that they're so hell-bent on being allowed to ignore EU subsidies, state aid rules. Because
what about the free
they could give them that bung.
What about planning free ports?
They can have free ports now. They don't need to leave the EU to get free ports. It's a dead cat.
Aye.
They can have free ports right now. It just means that when goods come out of the free port, they pay the tariffs the EU asks.
You kind of need people to start talking, eh? You kind of need. There's too many folk have been shafted by Boris and Dominic, and it might only take one or two of them to come forward and say, "Listen, this is what they promised me." Kind of like, say, for example, Leo Varadkar. Leo Varadkar and Boris had this meeting at Boris's gaff, and suddenly things changed. Now, he's made all kinds of promises to Leo Varadkar, who's now no longer Taoiseach. So why not just come out, Leo, and tell us all what Boris promised you when he was stroking you at Chequers? Tell us what he promised you, and tell us just how badly he's shafted you, because if you come out, there'll be others.
Well, here's another thought. The two biggest employers in Northern Ireland, businesses, Alexander Dennis in Scotland and down in Surrey, but there's a bus company, is it Volvo, huge bus company in Ballymena. They make buses, double-decker buses there, and you've got Harland and Wolff. Now, they're both big employers of Protestants in Northern Ireland, and they've both been in the news lately. Harland and Wolff don't forget, Boris went to visit the new Harland and Wolff yard down in Devon, which was a weird visit to make. And not Alexander Dennis, but the other bus company, they're involved actually. Some of the senior politicians are major shareholders in the bus company in Ballymena.
It's all a bit of a worry. I mean, what they're going to do? They're going to start building orange submarines in Belfast. That's what the bribe is.
Yeah. They won't actually build them.
Submarine,
They won't actually build them. They'll just pump some money the way of the DUP.
Well, there's a good point, because I mean, you know, when you say the DUP were promised that they got £1 billion way back, this sounds like history now, doesn't it? Now, okay, it didn't go into everybody's pockets, but if you can promise £1 billion to be invested across your constituency, there's an awful lot of kickback potential there, isn't there?
Well, that'll be the £1 million that had no Barnett consequentials attached.
Billion,
because it was an out-and-out bribe to get DUP votes by Mrs. May.
And one of the explanations for Arlene Foster saying nothing was that she said, oh, there was extra funding coming from the recovery or something, from the recovery of the pandemic.
And we ken that Arlene's corrupt, or Stormont would have been sitting for the last 3 years. You know what I mean?
Yeah, we forgot about that.
You're not possibly suggesting that Arlene Foster had anything to do with, what was it again? It was one of these weird fuel, something to do with fuel, and it was supposed to be one of these green things where they
was it insulating homes or something.
A green scheme but there was all kinds of money disappeared and went to certain friends of prominent loyalist politicians.
Yeah, they're good at that in Northern Ireland. Mind you, they're good at that in London now as well. So
presumably that's the one thing that those in Belfast have learned from London, and learnt well. Pockle and how to go about hiding it.
Well, they're basically really, 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 really mad Tories, aren't they? Sorry, can I put it another way? Really mad Tories, because Tories are getting madder by the moment across the nation. I noticed that Holyrood's Tory Justice Secretary totally ignored the question about how he felt about breaking international law. He just answered a different question.
Well, let's be honest, Norrie. What did you expect him to say?
Well, as they're a completely different party in Scotland.
Oh, are they? Who says?
The Scottish Tories. Although I see they're begging for money all over the UK, not just Scotland.
Aye.
I expected them to stand up and be decent about it. No, I didn't. Not for a minute did I expect them to stand up and be decent about it.
Are they begging in a very specific and limited way?
Um,
I'm not going to have that ready next time I'm lifted.
specifically, they're begging money to fight the SNP. And the way they're doing it is to get a cheque off you. Starting at £30.
30 raps.
They suggested it's like 30, 60, 100, 200.
What's this for?
This is the begging letter they sent out.
I didn't know they sent out a begging letter.
I'll tell you what, I'll give the
I didn't get one.
I'll make a public announcement now. I'll give the Scottish Tories £1,000 if I can kick Murdo Fraser up and down Ferry Road for 5 minutes.
Do a lot of damage in 5 minutes.
Oh, aye. Definitely get £1,000 worth in, that's for sure, Norrie.
You still got a pair of Steelies in the cupboard, Johnny.
Apart from anything else, mate, I could subcontract that all over lease and make a fortune.
You could make money out of it, that's true.
Aye.
Sell it for £500 5 times, a minute each.
Mm-hmm.
I might even have it. Well, no. I'd need to run him over with my wheelchair.
We'll get him doing and you can run the wheelchair right over him, mate. Right over his fingers.
I was going to say, anybody got anything funny to finish with, but that was quite funny.
Well.
Nope. Well, we'll call it a day at that then, guys. Cheers, Jimmy Hutton, the new working man amongst us. Thanks, Stuart Lockhead. And I'm Norrie Stewart. Thanks for listening, folks. We'll catch up with you tomorrow when Nicola Sturgeon has our FMQ session. And I think, is it the 3-week look this week?
So it's a report. So yeah, 3-week review. They made a law that they have to review any
and
regulations, emergency regulations.
I think we can safely say that nothing else is being unlocked this week.
Well, I have it on good authority. I was listening to Nicola Sturgeon. I don't think we'll be moving into phase 4.
No.
But who knows? We might get some amusement from Ruth tomorrow. And Willie might have a sensible question.
Now you're just into fantasy land. Stop while you're behind me.
Okay. We'll catch you tomorrow, folks. Thanks for listening.